They saw a 90-year-old widow, an easy target for their greed, her farm the last piece of unspoiled land in Briar Ridge. They didn't see the army nurse who'd served in 44 beneath the wrinkles, nor did they count on her grandson, a Navy SEAL. She made one call. The sun bled orange across the parched fields of Jacob's farm as Eleanor Jacobs, 90 years old and forged from the same resilient Kentucky earth, gripped a weathered fence post. Her faded blue eyes, still sharp despite the decades, watched Jed Rower and his men. They sat on their restless horses just beyond her property line, a miasma of smug entitlement clinging to them. Rower, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was as wide as his Stetson's brim, offered a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Evenin', Miss Jacobs," Rower drawled, his voice like gravel. "Still holdin' onto this dust bowl. Town's growin'. Progress waits for no one, specially not sentimental old ladies." His men snickered. Eleanor stood straighter, the prairie wind whipping strands of her thin, silver-white hair from its tight bun. She wore a simple, darned cotton work dress, faded from years of sun and labor. "This farm's seen 7 generations of Jacobs, Mr. Rower. It'll see me out too." Her voice, though thinned by age, held an unyielding core of iron. "And I recall a time when progress didn't mean stealin' from your neighbors." Rower's smirk tightened. "Stealin's a harsh word. I'm offerin' a fair price. Your price is an insult. Your methods, criminal. The barn fire the previous spring hadn't been accidental. The slow poisoning of her well, the fences cut in the dead of night, these weren't random acts. This was a siege, methodical and cruel, designed to break her." Rower just shrugged. "Accidents happen. Land gets tired. People get tired." He tipped his hat. "You'll come around." They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving a trail of dust and unspoken threats hanging in the air. Eleanor watched them go, her knuckles white on the fence post. Tired? She was 90 years old. Tired was her default state. But defeated? Never. That night, as a coyote howled a lonely lament to the sliver moon, Eleanor sat in her Spartan kitchen. The old farmhouse creaked around her like a ship in a storm. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis but surprisingly steady, reached for the ancient rotary phone. Each click of the dial felt like a small surrender, but also a call to arms she hadn't issued in decades. The connection crackled. A distant voice answered, curt and wary. "Yeah. Jack." Her voice was a reedy whisper. It's Grandma Ellie. I need you, son." Miles away, in a dim, transient apartment smelling of salt air and stale coffee on the Oregon coast, Jack Jacobs froze. His grandmother's voice, a sound he hadn't heard in over 12 years, cut through him like shrapnel. Briar Ridge. He'd buried too much there, his parents, his youth, a part of himself he thought long dead. Civilian life was a strange, ill-fitting suit after a decade as a Navy SEAL. He drifted, a ghost in his own life. But Grandma Ellie's voice, that was a lifeline to something real, something that mattered. This wasn't just family. This was an SOS from the very soil that had birthed him. Some battles didn't require a uniform. The roar of Jack's battered Dodge Ram was the first sound to break the uneasy dawn over Briar Ridge the next morning. He cut the engine at the head of the lane leading to the Jacobs farm, the old truck sighing as it settled. Dust motes danced in the pre-dawn light. The farmhouse stood like a weary but defiant old soldier, paint peeling, porch sagging, but its silhouette proud against the pale sky. Eleanor was on the porch steps, a thick, patched wool shawl clutched around her thin shoulders, her breath misting in the chill. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, yet her eyes held that familiar glint of unyielding Jacob's spirit. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You came," she finally said, her voice raspy with unshed tears and relief. Jack swung out of the truck, his 6-foot frame solid and imposing even in dusty jeans and a plain Henley. At 42, his dark hair was shorter than when he'd left, lines of experience etched around his intense blue eyes. "You called, Grandma." Her gaze swept over the neglected fields, the skeletal remains of the burned barn. "They want it all, Jack. Jed Rower. He's trying to scare me out. Won't stop till he gets it." Jack's jaw tightened. He walked up the steps, his boots crunching on the gravel path his father had laid. He placed a calloused hand on her frail shoulder. Then he picked the wrong damn family. By noon, Jack had completed his reconnaissance. The barn was a blackened husk, the air still thick with the stench of char and something acrid, accelerant, he guessed. Fences were down in multiple sections, not broken by weather, but cut clean. Boot prints, too many to count, circled the outer perimeter of the property, a clear sign of casing and intimidation. Inside, the farmhouse was clean but threadbare. Eleanor poured him coffee, her hands trembling despite her efforts to steady them. "They come mostly at night," she said, her voice low. "Rustlin' around. Sometimes I hear them right on the porch. They leave notes." She handed him a crumpled piece of paper. Crude block letters, "Sell or burn." All of it. Jack's eyes turned to ice. He'd seen threats like this before, scrawled on village walls in languages he barely understood, always carrying the same brutal message. He folded the note, his knuckles white. "Not anymore, Grandma. This stops now." The rest of the day was a blur of focused activity. Jack, moving with the quiet efficiency of his former profession, began to turn the farmhouse into a defensible position. He found an old hunting rifle of his grandfather's above the mantel, cleaned and oiled it until it gleamed. He checked the action of Eleanor's ancient but reliable 12-gauge shotgun. He used lumber salvaged from a collapsed shed to reinforce doors and board up vulnerable windows, leaving only strategic firing slits. He walked the property line, noting sight lines, approaches, and dead ground, his mind automatically cataloging tactical advantages and disadvantages. He even rigged a few simple tripwires using fishing line and tin cans in the dense brush near the likely approach routes. Eleanor watched him from her rocking chair on the porch, a strange mix of pride and sorrow in her eyes. "You always were a protector, Jack. Even as a boy, always looking out for the smaller creatures." She remembered her own service, the field hospitals, the sheer grit it took to save a life when everything around you was chaos. She saw that same grit in him now. Jack paused, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. A rare, faint smile touched his lips. "Some things you don't forget, Grandma. Like how to hold your ground." That evening, Jack drove his Ram into Briar Ridge. The town hadn't changed much on the surface. The same dusty main street, the same faded paint on the storefronts. But the air was different, heavier. Fear had a way of shrinking a place. He parked in front of Grady's Diner, a place that once buzzed with local gossip and laughter. Now, it felt subdued. He slid into a booth. Mary Lou, who'd given him cookies and bandaged his scraped knees as a boy, approached his table, her smile strained. "Jack Jacobs. My word. It's been a long time." "Too long, Mary Lou." He ordered coffee. She leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "You hear about your Grandma Ellie and Jed Rower?" Jack nodded. "He's a bad one, Jack. Owns near half the county now, or so they say. Got folks scared. Sheriff Turner. He don't lift a finger. Bought, most likely. Or just plain terrified." Jack sipped his coffee, his gaze sweeping the diner. A few old-timers nodded warily. Others looked away. "Maybe it's time folks remembered this town doesn't belong to men like Rower," he said quietly. The bell above the diner door jingled sharply. Jed Rower swaggered in, flanked by two thick-set, surly-looking men who were clearly his enforcers. Rower's eyes, small and predatory, scanned the room and locked onto Jack. A slow, Unpleasant smile spread across his face. Well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. If it ain't the prodigal Navy boy, come back to play farmer. Rower and his men sauntered over to Jack's booth. Jack didn't rise. He met Rower's gaze, his own expression unreadable. Rower. Leave my grandmother and her farm alone. Rower chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Your grandma's sittin' on prime land, Jacobs. Last undeveloped parcel this side of the river. I'm just making her a generous offer before things get out of hand. Fire, accidents, old folks get careless. Jack slowly pushed his coffee cup aside and rose to his full height, towering over Rower. The diner went silent, forks clattering onto plates. She's not selling. Rower's eyes narrowed into slits. That's a damn shame. Because then, things are definitely gonna get real ugly for the old bat. Jack leaned in, his voice a low, dangerous growl that only Rower and his men could hear. The only thing that's going to get ugly, Rower, is you, if you or your men set one foot on Jacob's land again. For a moment, something flickered in Rower's eyes, surprise, maybe even a hint of fear, before his bravado reasserted itself. He scoffed, motioned to his men, and they turned, swaggering out of the diner. But the message had been delivered. The first assault came that night, just after midnight. A sliver of moon offered little light. Jack was awake, stationed by a reinforced kitchen window, the old hunting rifle resting easily in his hands. He'd seen Eleanor to her room, the shotgun propped beside her bed, her expression grim but resolute. Just like old times, Grandma, he'd said, trying for a lightness he didn't feel. She just nodded. Some wars never end, son. He caught movement at the edge of the overgrown cornfield bordering the west pasture. Shadows detaching themselves from deeper shadows. 3, maybe 4 figures, moving low and fast. One of them tripped a wire Jack had strung across a narrow game trail. A series of tin cans clattered loudly, a primitive but effective alarm. Panic among the attackers. One stumbled, cursing, right into a heavy garden rake Jack had strategically propped against a rotted stump. He went down with a yelp. Before the man could recover or shout a warning, Jack was on him, a silent blur in the darkness, one hand clamping over the man's mouth, the other delivering a swift, disabling blow. A gunshot suddenly split the night, the distinct roar of Eleanor's 12-gauge. She'd fired a warning shot into the air from her bedroom window, as they'd planned. The remaining intruders, spooked by the alarm, the takedown, and the unexpected gunfire from the house, broke and fled back into the darkness. You can't hide in there forever, Jacobs. Rower's voice, enraged, echoed from the distant tree line. That farm is mine. Jack, dragging the groaning, captured thug towards the relative safety of the porch, called back, his voice cold and steady, carrying easily in the still night air. Want to bet your life on it, Rower? Silence. Then the sound of retreating hoofbeats, or perhaps a vehicle. At sunrise, Eleanor found Jack on the porch, cleaning the rifle, the captured thug now securely tied to a porch pillar, looking thoroughly miserable. Her hands were shaking as she offered Jack a steaming mug of coffee. We held them, she said, a note of weary triumph in her voice. Jack nodded, taking a deep gulp of the hot liquid. For now, Grandma. But he'll be back. And he'll bring more men. We can't do this alone every night. Eleanor's shoulders sagged. There's no one left to help, Jack. Rower scared them all off or bought them out. Just as the words left her mouth, a low rumble vibrated through the old farmhouse floorboards. It grew louder, a chorus of engines. Jack was instantly alert, rifle up, moving to the edge of the porch. But the vehicles cresting the rise weren't Rowers. It was a convoy of battered pickup trucks, old tractors, even a couple of dusty sedans, all heading towards Jacob's farm. Leading the way was Hank Daly, a neighboring rancher whose family had known the Jacobs for generations. Hank, his face like tanned leather, pulled his truck to a stop. He had a pronounced limp from a rodeo accident years ago, and an old Winchester lay across his lap. Dozens of other familiar faces were in the vehicles behind him, farmers, shopkeepers, a few younger folk Jack barely recognized. "Heard you had some trouble last night, Jack," Hank called out, his voice raspy. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Figured you and Ms. Jacobs might need some company." One by one, they climbed out of their vehicles, carrying shotguns, hunting rifles, pitchforks, and a stubborn, collective resolve. "We're tired of Jed Rower runnin' this county," a woman declared, her voice firm. "This is our home too. We're with you, Jack." "With you, Ms. Jacobs," another added. A wave of emotion, something Jack hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, washed over him. He looked at his grandmother. Her eyes were shining. Together, that day, the community of Briar Ridge, long dormant under Rower's oppressive shadow, began to fight back. Under Jack's guidance, they transformed Jacob's farm. They used tractors to build earthen berms. Trucks were parked to create choke points. They established watch shifts, communication lines. Jack, drawing on his SEAL training, taught them basic defensive tactics, how to create interlocking fields of fire, how to use the terrain to their advantage. For the first time in a long time, Briar Ridge wasn't owned by fear. It was fueled by unity. When Jed Rower and his emboldened gang returned for what they assumed would be the final takeover, they didn't find a lone SEAL and an old woman. They found a citizen militia, dug in and defiant, protecting one of their own. The final confrontation wasn't a prolonged battle, more a short, brutal skirmish at the farm's perimeter that quickly exposed Rower's hired thugs as bullies, not fighters, when faced with determined, organized resistance. Fire was exchanged, Rower's men trying to set another blaze, but the community's makeshift fire brigade quickly doused it. Jack, moving with lethal grace, systematically neutralized Rower's key enforcers, using non-lethal takedowns where possible but making it clear he was prepared for more. The fight culminated with Jack facing Rower himself. It was a raw, desperate brawl in the dirt, fists flying, but Rower, fueled by greed and rage, was no match for the focused power of a Navy SEAL fighting for his home. When Sheriff Turner finally arrived, not out of duty but forced by a dozen frantic calls from upstanding, armed citizens who'd had enough, he found Jed Rower and his remaining men disarmed, subdued, and surrounded by the determined faces of Briar Ridge. This time, there were too many witnesses, too much evidence, for their crimes to be ignored. The dawn broke clear and quiet over Briar Ridge. The scent of wood smoke and damp earth hung in the air. Jack stood with Eleanor on the porch, watching as their neighbors, their friends, worked together, clearing debris, checking on livestock, mending fences. A quiet sense of camaraderie filled the morning. "You did it, Jack," Eleanor whispered, her hand finding his. "You saved the farm." He looked at the determined faces, the shared purpose. "No, Grandma," he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "We saved it." Briar Ridge was more than just land, it was a tapestry of lives, of history, of stubborn, unyielding pride. And now, it was whole again. "Will you stay, son?" Eleanor asked, her voice hopeful. Jack looked out at the horizon, at the fields waiting to be tilled, at the community that had found its courage. He'd wandered the earth, fought other people's wars. But this small piece of Kentucky soil, this was different. This was a fight he hadn't known he needed, for a peace he hadn't known he craved. "Yeah, Grandma," he said, the words feeling right, feeling true. "I think I will." He knew, with a simple, profound certainty, that sometimes the most important battles were fought not in distant lands, but right where your roots ran deepest. And sometimes, winning meant more than just surviving, it meant staying, rebuilding, and choosing to cultivate hope in the stubborn earth. What does it truly mean to defend your home? Is it the land, the memories, or the community that stands with you? Share your thoughts on what gives a place its true worth in the comments below. Remember to always comment with respect. Subscribe for more stories of courage and conviction.